Feeling like a black sheep, living in society where everybody's happy with their spoon-fed false reality.
Welcome, everyone, to the long version with Fletcher and Charles. We have a really interesting conversation today regarding the Mueller report and the fallout from that. I guess I want to start off the conversation, Fletcher, with the first part of the report. It says no collusion. What do you say?
Well, it does say that, and I think that, let's say this. No, that's not really what the report says. It says there's no conspiracy, and I think that's an important distinction in line to draw. Is they were looking for a criminal conspiracy, and a criminal conspiracy is generally loosely defined as two or more people acting in concert for an unlawful design during which a substantial step toward committing the offense occurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They didn't feel like they could show that. I think that here's the thing. We've got to learn to quit using the word collude and start using the word conspire. I think that's what's causing the confusion.
Mm-hmm.
Collude's not a legal term. He wasn't looking for collusion. I'm not lecturing you. I'm talking about everybody in America. Everybody in America has got to learn that he found significant collusion. Collusion's just not illegal. I mean, there's no way you can say that the Trump campaign did not collude with Russian officials to dig up dirt on Hillary Clinton to win the election. There's 200 pages of written report where they did exactly that. Right? But that's just not a crime. That it may not be copacetic. It may not be ideal, but it's not criminal. And so that's what the report. The report was not a Trump exoneration. Trump has patently misrepresented this, and he tends to patently misrepresent things. This report was more of his actions were awful, but we don't believe we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was a meeting of the minds prior to the election to interfere, meddle with, or in otherwise change what the result would have been.
Right. But that did not stop the Russians from acting in the United States and via social media to influence election outcomes. One thing that I found really disturbing was the level that the Russians went to have rallies and social media and you're literally promoting Donald Trump or discrediting Hillary Clinton.
Let me say this, Charles. The Russians, without question, meddled in the 2016 election, meddled in the 2018 election, and will meddle in the 2020 election. The report is resounding in that result. That's what they did.
Yeah, it sounded pretty clear to me.
It is clear that Trump was going to gain an advantage from the meddling, that he was the selected winner of the meddling campaign, and that he was okay with that outcome, as were they. What they couldn't really show is how these two parties conspired beforehand to throw the election in Trump's favor and then came through and did. I mean, it's more like two ships met in the night heading for the same destination.
Right.
They arrived at the destination, and they may have even have helped each other arrive at the destination, but neither ship captain conspired with the other to both go to the Bahamas.
Right. One of the things that I thought was interesting was Julian Assange and his involvement in actually wanting to not have Hillary Clinton as president and releasing emails to that effect, or to discredit her. And so, there's a lot of involvement by a lot of people in this election.
And the report was also clear that the Russians, that the Russians, released emails at Trump's request, B, had an email dump at a time when they wanted to get the news cycle off of Trump's discussion of grabbing vaginas.
Yes, yeah, that was timed pretty well.
So, I mean, it wasn't an exoneration, but, I'm kind of used to Trump turning things into what he needs them to be, irrespective of what they are. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think the most ardent Trump fan can argue with the fact that that's exactly what he does. He controls the news cycle, and he controls the parlance of information, no matter whether the information that he's parlaying is true or not. And I think most people that are Trump fans say, you know what, I don't care that he's a liar. I've got more money now than I had when Obama was in the presidency. I think that's what people say. Well, the economy's better now, we think, than it was.
Right.
And, that he's up there to protect my money. He's up there to protect my money. And I don't give a damn if I don't care whether he's lying or not, is kind of what I hear most people say.
Mm-hmm. That is, people do vote with their pocketbooks, and that is the feeling I get as well. Let's now, the second part of this is the obstruction, which was a little more direct, I guess, in that Mueller said there wasn't enough evidence to charge, but he sort of kicked the ball to Congress.
I didn't read that to say I didn't. I read the second part of the report differently than you, Charles. I read the report to say he's absolutely committed obstruction in at least 10 ways. Absolutely. But it would be unfair for me, since I can't indict him, it would be unfair for me to arrive at a conclusion that he's committed obstruction, because he doesn't get the adversarial trial process and the opportunity to be heard and the other things that defendants have when they are accused by their government of the commission of an offense. However, he can be heard and he can get his trial via the impeachment process. So I'm kicking this to Congress for them to fulfill their constitutional role. I think that's exactly what he said about obstruction. I think the obstruction part was way far away from exoneration. I think it was as antithetical to exoneration as one can get.
I think that, yeah, and he might as much as said that in the report, that this is not an exoneration. Other discussions, though, let's talk about the obstruction laws, and that they are, in fact, very broad.
Yeah, and that's the one where there's a lot of historical background for constituting the underpinnings of an impeachment, because that was the articles. Those were the 3 articles of impeachment brought against Nixon. Obstruction's legal definition is something that hinders an investigation, is kind of the layman's best way to put it.
Now, do you have are you looking at the report at the moment? Do you have it in front of you?
I've got it. Yes.
So let's go to page 220, where it does explain that he's not exonerated from the charges of obstruction.
Yeah. I think you're talking about the portion where it says we're not saying that he committed obstruction, but we're not exonerating him either.
Right.
Is that what you're pointing towards?
Yes.
Well, yes. But he goes on to say, if you take the full, of course, that's out of context, pulling one thing off of page 220. But what he says in the entirety of the report, and the entire 200 pages, is we can't say he committed obstruction, because it would be improper for us to say that without giving him an opportunity to be able to mount a defense in an adversarial trial process.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So his opportunity is going to come if Congress votes for impeachment.
Right. 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 If they bring articles of impeachment, and it'll pass the House. The question is, the Senate's the jury.
Right.
So how do you gain a conviction in the jury? So what now, to be an obstruction, the person charged with obstruction has to realize that what they're doing is obstructive, right? I mean, they have to take active steps to interfere with or impede an ongoing investigation of them, right? Or of another party. I mean, you can obstruct justice for a third party too. You know, let's say I'm not the president, right? But the FBI is investigating my friend Charles Rollo. Okay, we don't want that to happen, but you know, and so I find out that our friend that we used to work with over there at G1, he's getting called to testify against you, correct? Mm-hmm. So I call him up and I say, look, Joe, here's the version of the events I would like for you to tell the federal government. You know, we both know this isn't what happened, but this is what I want you to tell them. I want you to tell them this because I think they'll quit investigating Charles if you tell them this, right? That is, I've demonstrated in that scenario sufficient scienter that I know that I am in fact interfering with that investigation, right? That's your garden variety obstruction of justice offense. You know, Nixon wanted to hinder the investigation into him and his conduct as president, so he fires the Attorney General of the United States in what's come to be known as the Saturday Night Massacre, correct?
Right, yeah.
He not only fires him, he fires almost every ranking member of the Justice Department, knowing full well that would hinder their investigation into the Watergate allegations, correct? Right. That is obstruction of justice. Well, you know, Trump called the Attorney General and asked him, in essence, to not investigate or cease the investigation into Michael Flynn.
Right.
He, according to McGahn and his evidence, his testimony that he gave special counsel, he called McGahn and told him to fire the special counsel that's investigating him. If he fires the special counsel that's investigating him, that is obstruction of justice. End of dictation.
Yeah.
Story over. You see what I'm saying?
Right, but McGahn refused to do. As a matter of fact, a lot of his staff, his cabinet, refused to act on the things he was trying to do. They actually stopped his obstruction.
Well, they saved him.
Yeah.
But, you know, if you're being saved from, you can cut this out, but I got to, if you're being saved from committing an offense because the person that was supposed to help you commit it reneges, you've still committed an offense.
Right.
That's called an inchoate crime, which is attempted obstruction. You're still committing an offense. It seems to me like that the report basically says, here's what it says about obstruction. He would have committed obstruction if he had better help.
Yes. I got that.
I think that's what it said. He would have committed obstruction of justice, but for the fact that he can't seem to find help that'll do what he tells him.
The one of the things I read in the report, and as far as the actual obstruction laws, was that he doesn't actually have to intend to obstruct the law or obstruct the investigation, but he has the end result. If the end result is obstruction, he's still guilty of obstruction.
I think you're right, Charles. I think I misspoke. I think I gave it more criminal scienter than necessary. And I think what I'm confusing is obstruction of justice with the campaign finance laws.
Right.
The campaign finance laws, which are an oddity in criminal law, requires you to know that you're actually committing a campaign finance offense, which, the amount of criminal intent, they talk about criminal scienter and criminal intent. In a normal criminal statute, the amount of intent requisite to satisfy that element is the intent to undertake and complete the underlying act that turns out to be illegal. Like, for instance, if I shoot a gun at you and kill you, but I was trying to wing you through the shoulder and I hit your heart, it's not a defense to murder that I was trying to wing him in the shoulder, right?
Right.
Because they don't have to prove that I intended to murder you. They have to prove that I intended to fire the weapon.
Right. Yeah.
When I fired the weapon,
a bad shot doesn't.
Yeah. No, right. If they can prove I fired the weapon, then I'm criminally responsible for any reasonable consequence that would occur from that action, including your death, right?
Right.
So if I shoot through a closed door and you're on the other end and you die, I might not have committed a first-degree murder, but I've still committed a murder at law. I would still be charged with murder because I intended to fire the gun.
Right. So there's a significant burden on the act.
The finance. Yeah. Well, yes. Well, the financial campaign laws require more scienter than a normal criminal statute because it requires you to know that you're violating that law. This action will violate that law. Like, for instance, it's a defense to campaign finance that I didn't know there was such a law as campaign finance laws, which is not a defense. Ignorance of the law is never a defense except for campaign finance laws. It's defense of that. So I got those two confused. So the level of scienter for obstruction, you're right. I was wrong. And I'm the one with the doctorate in jurisprudence, but you're right. I was wrong.
I just read the report, man. That's all.
Yeah. But don't you see that report is horrific when it comes to obstruction for the president? It's horrific.
It's stunning that the amount of activity that went into trying to obstruct but failing, and the amount of interference by outsiders in the election and the lengths that they went to.
Yeah, and I want to stress again, attempting but failing to obstruct justice is still an offense.
Right.
It may be an attempt, but it's still an offense. It's still an offense. It's still a crime.
Right. So now we're to the point now where Congress has the report. They're working on impeachment for the president, trying to conclude that. So my understanding of this, and I did a little bit of homework on it, is that Congress is going to bring charges, and those charges will be voted on. And once, if they are in fact passed, they will go to the Senate. And then the Senate, as you said, acts as a jury, and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court will be the judge.
Right.
On that. And then so the case is brought to them, and then once the case is finished, they have to vote on whether impeachment is
whether he's removed.
Now, there's only been two cases in the history of the U.S. that the presidents have been impeached: Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson. Neither one were removed from office.
Well, Richard Nixon was going to be impeached, and I think they passed articles of impeachment, but he resigned before the trial.
He removed himself.
Right.
Right. So we could say that in the end result was that Nixon was removed from office because he probably figured he was done. Right.
Well, Barry Goldwater told him that he was done.
Yeah.
I mean, he asked Goldwater, how many of you boys have got my back in this thing? And he said, I don't. And I guess he figured if the father of the conservative movement didn't have his back, he wasn't going to fare too well with the others.
Right.
The interesting thing is that you're going into a very loaded jury here. You get a jury, and it takes 2/3, I think, to remove you from office of the vote. But what are the chances in today's world, as tribal as politics has become, as polarizing as politics are? What are the chances they're going to vote anything other than right down party lines? I wouldn't think they're very good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the other thing I would say is that as far as my reading goes, impeachment process can include his entire staff, including the vice president.
So this trial isn't really fair at all, right? If you don't get a jury of your peers, you get a jury of your buddies.
Yes.
I mean, that's the thing. The people that are in the party with you, you've campaigned for these people. Some of these people you've put in office, right? Yes. And these are the people that you get to use as your jury. You're getting a jury of your buddies. Well, I can tell you right now, I don't know if I have 12 friends. But if I could pick 12 friends to be on a jury considering my guilt, I'd pick you, Charles.
Oh,
Number one.
thanks.
You'd be one of my 12. But it'd probably be pretty hard to convict me. If that's not a fair trial. I don't know. It's funny how they picked that as it's almost like our founding fathers. I mean, come on. They had to know this wasn't going to be fair.
Yeah, there's a lot of things they did that that turn out to be more. They knew the end result even when they started it. But
if I'm a prosecutor, I'm pretty pissed about the fact that I'm having to try this case to this loaded jury that's coming into it with preconceived notions that are going to be nearly impossible to move them off of. And, back in the old days, Charles, people would hear something like the Billy Bush tapes and the grabbing vaginas, and it actually impacted their vote, impacted their opinion, impacted whether they would support a candidate. Don't you feel like today that it really doesn't matter what you say, who you say it? It doesn't matter if it's recorded. If they're for you, they're much more forgiving than what people used to be. Am I the only one that feels that way, or?
No, I agree with that, and I think that the sense of integrity and credibility go out the window when it's your team. It doesn't matter what your team did. We have to win, and we have to be in control, and we support the team no matter what.
Well, you and I remember a time when they set up a political Jerry Hart was running for president, and he goes out to some party at a boat dock, and some floozy jumps in his lap. They take a picture of it. He didn't even know this girl, right?
Yeah.
He's out of the race.
Yeah, he's done.
He was set up by this girl was paid to jump in his lap and get this picture taken. I mean, that's come out years later. I mean, they've interviewed the guy that said, yeah, I paid her to do that. I knew this would sink him.
Yeah, what do you do? I mean, and now you can't even get water in the boat, let alone sink somebody for their activities.
I mean, now it just seems to me like that there was nothing that Trump made a comment one time that he could shoot somebody in the streets of New York and not get prosecuted. I think that's probably true. That might be the truest thing he said since he's been in office. He can talk about doing anything he wants. He can say any misogynist, sexist thing he wants to say. He can say any inflammatory. Now, I think some of the things that Trump says get kind of taken more seriously than what he intended. And I think that he makes a lot of tongue-in-cheek type of commentary. It's probably not a good idea in which to engage because some people in the media are going to take it seriously.
Right, and they're going to grab onto it. I think having thought about it, I think one of, or I should say a lot of Trump's issues result from the fact that he has not understood that he is not running his own company in the U.S. government, but that he is in fact in a public office and he's running it like he's the CEO of the country and he's acting like it and he's doing things that he would do in his own company, but those things aren't as going to fly because now you can have opposition from many different places in the United States government and outside.
I think Democrats are worried that if they initiate an impeachment process and make it a platform in the coming election, they'll lose the White House.
Yeah.
I think they're worried about that. But I think that they also have an additional worry that should concern them, and that is if we allow this conduct to go uncharged, what kind of a precedent does that set going forward?
Right.
The next time someone follows this recipe to arrive at this same product, that is the presidency, and we find out that maybe they hadn't conspired with Russia to interfere with the election, but they've damn sure colluded with them, right?
Right.
And maybe they haven't obstructed justice, but it's only because they got shitty help, right?
Yeah.
And then they're going to say, well, I thought I could, I can't do this. I thought I could do this because I'm just following the Donald Trump formula. And you guys didn't even, you knew about everything he did. You had a special prosecutor. He told you everything he did. You didn't even initiate impeachment proceedings.
Yeah. If I were the Democrats, I would go forward with the impeachment, even though it looks like it's doomed anyway, just so you can get stuff on the table. You know, as well as you're probably more aware than anyone that if you go into court and you get evidence laid out and it raises a question, you might not win the criminal case, but you may win a civil case based on that evidence.
There's been a lot of criminal, of course, you're not supposed to use a criminal process to gain advantage in the civil proceeding, but there's been a lot of criminal process issued where the people may not have hoped that they would gain a conviction, but they hoped to learn things they could use in the subsequent civil matter. O.J. Simpson comes readily to mind. He won the criminal case, got killed in the civil one.
Yeah.
You know, he had to testify in the civil case. He couldn't claim that he couldn't take the fifth because he had been tried and acquitted.
Yeah.
So he was no longer in criminal jeopardy, see?
Yes. I think that my impression is that they should go forward, but it won't succeed. And
I think they'll lose, but they have to do it. I think they have to do it, Charles. I think if they don't do it, it sets such a dangerous precedent going forward. History is watching. That's what I would tell the Democrats. History is watching you.
Yes.
And they're going to take a tremendous lesson from what you do or what you feign or what you don't do. Right?
Right.
This is going to be a lesson. This is going to mold future conduct. This is going to guide and direct what candidates think they're capable of doing free from sanction or even the threat of sanction. And so I think that they have to bring articles of impeachment, 2020 be damned. I think they have to do it.
Yes, I don't, because what they'll gain knowledge-wise from that is probably going to aid them in their campaign.
Well, it may hurt them in 2020. It may cost them the House, the Senate. Yeah, here's something else, too. I don't know that we can ever again afford to have these super majorities in government. I think if there's one thing we've learned as an American populace is that if we have a Democratic president, we better load up the Senate and Congress with GOPers.
Yeah,
if we have a GOP in the White House, we need to have some Democrats in the House and Senate. But go ahead.
In the boat of politics, one oar pulling in one direction makes it go in circles. But if you have both oars in the water pulling, as a conservative or liberal or Democrat or Republican, it helps the boat go in the right direction and gives it balance.
Well, I really think that going forward, the American public would be wise to ensure that they don't have any more of these super majorities. We have not fared too well with them.
Yes.
We really haven't. Obama had several years where he didn't really get anything done at all, and he had Democratic control of the Senate and House. Trump really didn't. I mean, he got some people appointed to the Supreme Court, which is significant. I don't mean to downplay the significance of that, but he really didn't get a lot accomplished when he had a super majority, when he had control of the White House, the executive branch, and Republicans were in charge of the House and the Senate.
Yeah.
So, like for instance, they couldn't get anything done about Obamacare, and he really tried.
Yes, he couldn't get a cooperation of his own party.
And I really think the problem with his efforts to remove Obamacare is that he didn't have an alternative plan. I think that we can't be a civilized society and allow people to die because they're too impoverished to afford treatment.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. And I just think the Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, really was ill-conceived, moved through Congress way too fast because it was like 1,600 pages of no one even read them. Very few people actually went through the document and read it, and we ended up with a really convoluted system that seems to be imploding on itself at this time. So we're still without any alternative plan.
Yeah, I think we have to have something. I think that there are certain things that I would like to see us adopt. I'd love to see us have available health care for people, even those that can't afford it. And I'd love to see people be able to gain an education without having to, in essence, take on a mortgage-sized debt in order to do it, which limits what they can do professionally. That kills the entrepreneurial spirit, because if you come out, for instance, if you student loan yourself through undergrad and grad school, by the time you come out, you can't be an entrepreneur because you owe the government significant sums of money, and that they expect to be repaid, of course, obviously. And so, I mean, it kills the entrepreneurial spirit, I'm afraid.
Yes. One item on that would be, people talk about colleges, four-year colleges, master's degrees and doctorates, but there's a whole layer of work or employment in the trades, and people, I'm starting to hear a lot of conversation about, why do we need to learn the history so I can be a carpenter?
Well, I think you need to learn history so to avoid internment camps. I think you need to know history so you can see, you can avoid committing, if you're Donald Trump, some of the same mistakes that led to Watergate. I think that's, he who knoweth not his own history is forever doomed to repeat it, is the saying. And I think that the important thing about history is to understand why we need to suppress the white nationalists. Why that, what happens when the white nationalist gains a foothold and is able to beat back the detractors and become just a national movement. Well, you end up with this, the Nazi Party,
right?
And 6 million dead Jews. I mean, that's what happens. I think that's important. I'm going to tell you this: people need to learn to think, and that's what we have done. We've become so trade and technically oriented that many of our citizenry are incapable of independent thought.
I think they don't teach independent thought anymore. The phrase don't. I heard was, they're no longer taught how to think, but what to think.
And that's dangerous. That's dangerous. When you have an electorate that is waiting to be told what to think, they will be subject to anybody with the most compelling ability to tell them.
Right. The analytical thought is just, people just don't have it. I mean, I hear people say things that really, if you just took 1 second or two to think about what you just said, you would think, oh, well, that was dumb. Why did like someone I read just recently was saying, we have in this town I live in, this village, we have train tracks. And so we have a lot of trains going through the village. And someone said, well, why don't we just get rid of the trains? The cheapest form of moving, stuff across the country that you can do, and no thought was put into that comment.
Well, that's one of those, because it disadvantages me, then we just need to do away with the train. It's like, I think they should do away with mosquitoes, except for the fact that everything in the eco chain that dies above it that feeds on mosquitoes, right?
Right.
Well, people don't think about it. Here's the thing. Here's a litmus test for you. Number one, if you've ever made the statement, I don't care what you say, I know what I know, you're probably a stupid person. If you've never changed your mind, regardless of the persuasive content of the argument being made to you, you're probably a stupid person.
Right.
We have to be wary of the fact, first of all, we need to be capable of analytical thought, because we're told a lot of bullshit now.
Oh, tons of it.
We're just, we don't even know where to go we don't know what a legitimate news source is. Pretty much the fake news campaign has taken from us any news source and has almost made every news source in existence entirely illegitimate in the minds of the people that are voting, right? The fake news. And what did we learn in the Mueller report when the Mueller report came out? You know what we learned, Charles? This stuff that had been called fake news was dead on.
Yeah, some of it was, yeah.
Some of this stuff was dead on. I mean, there were people, integral journalists reporting this stuff on behalf of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and they couldn't have been any more correct than they were. So, I mean, I really fear, I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I said, the newspaper business is really over. And they said, why? I said, well, two reasons. Number one, nobody reads print media anymore, except for the very elderly people who we lose all the time. Yeah. Right. And number two, everybody with a blog, you and I are journalists. Everybody with a blog is a journalist. Everybody's a journalist. Any of us can be journalists. You and I are TV entertainers, I guess. I mean, there's too much competition for you, right? I mean, you can have your own. Why in the world would you ever turn on an analog radio and ever listen to it? I don't know what I would say. There's no way I could sell radio advertising, because someone would say, well, nobody listens to radio anymore. I wouldn't even be able to argue with them. Who would listen to the radio?
Right. I don't.
I don't. I mean, everything that I listen to or watch is online.
Yeah. I find that radio is so impertinent to me anymore. The stuff that they put on, the mainstream drivel, I can't stand it. I have to turn it off.
I can't stand it when they have an informal conversation back and forth, because it's senseless and ridiculous.
Yes. And
you just want to say, good Lord, man, I can't believe what passes for radio. Let me just say that. I'll never forget one time, most of the law that I practiced was in Nashville, Tennessee. And I made a lot of television appearances in Nashville, Tennessee. In fact, I did well over 100 morning lines with Nick Barris, which was a popular show on cable television in Nashville, Tennessee, right? It was on the news channel 5 Plus, and it was a very popular show. Hundreds of thousands of people tuned in every day to this show. Nick Barris was a big star in the Nashville market. But he calls me up one day. Nick and I are still good friends. He calls me up one day, and I'm listening to talk radio, afternoon sports talk radio, drive time radio, on a station servicing a town of 2 million people. Nashville's one of the largest cities in the South. I think it's in the top 10 most populated cities in the South, right? Has an NFL team, has an NHL team, has the NFL draft going on right now, Charles, And I'm listening to this show, and these guys are just, it's one inane, unfunny comment after another, to which only they are laughing. It's airtime chock full of inside jokes. If you and I came on and did a podcast and did nothing but talked about stories in which only you and I are in, we're in on the stories, but nobody watching us has the first clue what it is, we're talking about. Right. If we told a bunch of G1 stories, who would get it except for us? I mean, that reference means something to us, but, almost nobody else has ever looked at that particular entity that I can tell. What's it get? 3 views a day? This international whatever. But nobody would think that's particularly funny, because only you and I get it. I mean, and so anyway, they were doing all this inside humor stuff, and I called Nick Barris because Channel 5 was sponsoring this station. They're like the TV version of this station. And I said, Nick, where'd you find these cats? They're not even talented broadcasters. Hell, I can't even stand to listen to them. One of their voices sounds like nails on a chalkboard. And I'm like, how can this pass for drive time radio in the state of Tennessee's largest city, in the largest market in the state of Tennessee? I was on an analog station. I was on News Talk 1510 WLAC 20 years ago. I had a show called Legally Speaking when I was an attorney. And it was the #1 rated show on Saturday night on opposite the Opry. I never beat the Opry, Charles, but I tied them in 3 ratings books.
All right.
So, if I'm interesting to whom to listen, it's because I'm a professional broadcaster. I've done this professionally.
Right.
But there's so many people that I hear on air today. They're not professional broadcasters. I don't know what the hell they are. Maybe they're former NFL players or something, but they're not professional broadcasters.
Mediocre is the new normal.
Well, that brings me another funny story. They've got these, you're going to love this. These schools in Kentucky, they get, based on their test scores, they either get an elite school or they get a proficient school or they're substandard, right? Well, this high school in Hopkinsville had gained the level of proficiency. Proficiency is average. Well, I'm proficient. How are you at reading? Well, I read proficiently, right? Not a great reader. Hell, I'm proficient. Hell, I can read, right? I don't know that this is anything about which to brag. So I drive up to this school. They've got a huge banner. Congratulations for reaching the attainment of proficient high school. I thought, holy shit, what an achievement.
We're not crap.
Yeah, hey, we're completely average. Hey, hooray for us.
Right.
We have completely sucked until today.
Yes.
Today we're average.
Today we're average. It's a wonderful thing.
I called a friend of mine who was on that faculty, and I said, I know you're proud. You must be beaming with pride. He said, Long, would you shut the hell up? Why do you have to call? He said, hey, congratulations, dude. You're completely proficient.
Yes. Yeah, and they even give it a fancy name to make it sound good, too.
Yeah, proficient sounds good unless you look it up.
Yeah. Okay, well, I have exhausted my commentary for today. So we don't know what we're going to talk about next time, but we sure will come up with something.
Hey, I just want to say in closing about the Mueller report.
Go ahead.
They found no conspiracy. They found a hell of a ton of collusion. They didn't find any. We've been calling it the wrong thing. They found a lot of collusion. They didn't find any conspiracy.
Right.
Obstruction of justice. I think they found obstruction of justice, but they punted it to the Congress to fulfill its constitutional role.
Yes, I think that was the plan too. Yeah, and so let's hope that Congress is not proficient in this executing this.
Yeah, let's hope that they excite their let's hope that they perform their constitutional duties at a rate and level above proficiency.
Yes, that's what I would expect. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining Fletcher and Chaz on the long version. We'll see you next time. Of course, we're going to be on multiple social media platforms. Look for us there and give us an upvote or a plus sign or a thumbs up or whatever it is that they have on their sites. And we thank you. Have a good day, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Feeling like a black sheep, living in society where everybody's happy with their spoon-fed false reality.